Coming up on New Day at Arirang, Omicron running rampant across South Korea. Projections showing possibly over 50,000 new infections over the past day, which would be a record for the country. To lessen the burden on the healthcare system, a new self-treatment program starts on Thursday. South Korean short track speed skating star Hwang Dae-heon wins the country's first gold in Beijing. In the men's 1500-meter event at the Winter Olympics, it's the second career Olympic medal for Hwang, who captured the silver in the 500-meter event in Pyeongchang 4 years ago. Plus, South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics unveils its latest Galaxy S smartphones, the S22, S22 Plus and S22 Ultra. Pre-orders start in South Korea next week for the models that pack upgraded camera performances, stronger chips, and eco-friendly features.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. February 10th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the course of the next hour, we'll be taking a look at the biggest news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. We start, though, with the COVID-19 situation. South Korea is continuing to see record-breaking daily infections. Today's tally forecast to top 50,000 for the first time.
This comes as the country's new home treatment system is set to launch today. For more on this, our reporter Choi Min-jung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
So let's start with the local tally for today. We're expecting another record high.
That's right, Mo-kyan. Daily cases are soaring at a very rapid pace. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Wednesday, South Korea saw more than 48,000 cases. This is up by around 7,400 cases from the day before. So we are forecast to see the number of new infections comfortably surpass the 50,000 mark today. Health authorities have said that once daily cases exceed 50,000, hospitals will be able to put COVID-19 patients in regular wards if hospitals run out of negative pressure units. Officials said that doctors may also consider temporarily treating regular patients using non-contact method, and medical workers who are infected may still come to work wearing masks after a couple of days.
And starting today, self-treatment for people infected with COVID-19 gets underway. So tell us more about that.
That's right, Mark. With the spread of Omicron, around 90% of new infections are asymptomatic or showing mild symptoms. So the majority of people infected are recovering from home. As we know, they have been divided into two groups, the intensive management group and the regular management group. While people over 60 and those receiving COVID-19 oral treatment are monitored by the hospital, those under 60 must look after themselves. They won't be subject to regular monitoring, but they will be able to conduct non-contact treatment by calling a local hospital or clinic when they experience symptoms. Home treatment call centers will also operate 24/7. The Korea Medical Association says around 1,700 medical institutions are currently participating in this new system, and more than 3,000 institutions have shown willingness to participate. It added that this is enough to manage more than 180,000 people recovering from home.
Now, Min-jung, turning to the vaccination front, we heard that yesterday the Novavax vaccine has been distributed for the first time in the country.
That's right, Mo-kyan. The first batch of U.S. drug maker Novavax's COVID-19 vaccine has become available in the country on Wednesday. 292,000 doses were released, and the country is expecting 2 million doses to be distributed this month. And this is part of the 40 million doses the country plans on distributing in total. The vaccine is being produced by local company SK Bioscience and is the third to be manufactured and distributed in South Korea after AstraZeneca and Moderna's vaccine. But it is the first protein subunit vaccine to be manufactured in the country. This means that it uses a more traditional method like those used to develop vaccines for hepatitis B and cervical cancer. So watchers say there are fewer concerns about side effects. Officials have also said it is relatively easier to distribute the vaccine even abroad if necessary, as it can be stored between 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. The vaccine is set to be administered to those over 18 years old who have yet to be vaccinated, and people who haven't had the booster shot due to side effects from the first 2 doses are also eligible. Authorities are set to announce details on its inoculation plans later in this afternoon.
So those of us here in South Korea are undergoing this transition phase since Omicron has become the dominant strain here in South Korea. And as a result of that, the authorities are tailoring their antivirus measures. So fill us in on that.
Right, that's one of the changes that may occur is the QR code check-in system. Currently, people have to use check-ins using QR codes or write down their personal information when going to public venues. This data was used to keep track of the movements of the infected people. But the government says that it is not as necessary as it is now shifting towards a more Omicron-tailored strategy, focusing on high-risk patients and cohabitants of the infected. Earlier, the government also implemented a self-survey system where infected people can fill out epidemiological surveys by themselves instead of being asked by public health workers. Another potential change they may be introduced is the age requirement for COVID-19 pills, as authorities are considering allowing people under 40 who are at high risk to receive oral treatment as well. Earlier this month, officials lowered the age bracket to 50.
Right, Min-jung, thank you so much for your report. Talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, as always. Now, with the new surge in Omicron cases and cases rising exponentially by the day, it seems, lawmakers here in South Korea are discussing ways to ensure people infected with COVID-19 and those in self-isolation can still vote in next month's presidential election.
The rush comes amid concerns that as many as 500,000 people could be unable to exercise their right to vote if nothing gets changed before the March 9th election. Our Lee Kyung-in reports from the National Assembly.
Leading up to South Korea's presidential election on March 9th, the government is expecting to see daily infections to top 170,000 by next month. If an infection occurs before the early voting period, patients can cast their ballots at COVID-19 treatment centers. But the problem comes after the early voting, because if you get infected during the time, there's virtually no way to vote. There'll be no special polling stations for them on election day. Plus, by then, mail-in ballot applications will have been over for weeks. Under these rules, as many as 500,000 people could be unable to exercise their right to vote. To prevent it from happening, the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party are suggesting extending voting time to 9 p.m. After the regular voting ends at 6 p.m., they're proposing the use of the extra 3 hours to allow COVID-19 patients and people in self-quarantine to cast their ballots. The current guideline already allows those in self-isolation to vote after 6 p.m. after the regular voting period, but lawmakers are looking to expand this measure to include COVID-19 patients.
With the National Election Commission, we'll consider drive-through voting and other measures to find the best way to ensure people can exercise their right to vote.
However, the National Election Commission ruled out 2 of those options. Secretary General Kim Se-hwan said drive-through voting will face too many legal challenges. He also said it is not necessary to extend voting hours until 9 p.m. Instead, the NEC has suggested designating 2 days for them to vote, one during the early voting period and the other on election day, and extend the voting time after the regular voting period just briefly for patients to vote. Prime Minister Kim Buk-yeom says the government will finalize the voting protocols on the 15th in a ministerial meeting. Lee Kyung-in, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. The number of new COVID-19 cases globally is continuing to spike, driven almost exclusively now by the highly transmissible Omicron strain.
Thankfully, it is less serious than previous variants, but it's still putting extra strain on healthcare systems around the world, including here in South Korea. For more at where we stand globally in regards to the pandemic, we're joined by Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
So since the last time we spoke, South Korea is now experiencing a rapid uptick in the number of new infections, especially Omicron. For our viewers who might feel under the weather, what symptoms should we look out for, and what are the best practices if you feel like you have it?
Well, Omicron tends to be milder than previous variants of COVID. It's particularly mild in people who've been vaccinated or people who've previously had other COVID infections. The presentation is often like a mild cold, a stuffy nose, feeling a bit under the weather. And because it's so similar to the symptoms of other viral common colds, it's really valuable if you can get tested, really valuable if you can go to get a test, either a rapid test at home or do a PCR test. Because if you know it's COVID, you can follow the regulations, you can isolate at home, etc. And if it's not COVID, that's good news for you. I mean, it's not good that you've got a cold, but it's maybe good that it's not COVID. So it's difficult to distinguish based just on symptoms, whether it's COVID or just another common cold infection.
Now, there are numerous reports of people getting reinfected with Omicron after already having it. Firstly, a two-pronged question. Is that something you are aware of? And in general, if someone is reinfected with COVID-19, regardless of the strain, is it generally milder, as it's something our immune system is better able to deal with?
Well, for the first question, there's a number of different strains of Omicron going round. There's the BA1, which came in first, and then the BA2, which is sometimes called stealth Omicron, because in the PCR test, it looks slightly different. And I think it's possible to get both of those if you're really unlucky. But in general, within a short space of time, it's very unusual to have COVID twice. We know that in the longer term, immunity after an infection won't last forever. It should last for months, maybe even a year or longer, but it won't last forever. And so many people who are getting COVID now already had it once, maybe a year or 2 years ago. But if you get Omicron now, I think you won't get COVID again for a period of time. And if you do get COVID again, most likely it won't be Omicron. It'll be whatever comes next, another variant maybe.
Right. Well, Professor, South Korea is also talking about giving a fourth shot to some senior people, but it seems like efforts to, even boost the booster shot campaign is continuing. So, aside from booster shots, should governments consider other options, and if so, which options could you recommend?
Well, I think Israel looked at fourth doses and found that actually it didn't help that much. Third doses, we know, make a big difference. Having another dose or a fourth dose doesn't help that much. And in terms of vaccination strategies, it's probably more important to still focus on first dose, second dose, and third doses. So I don't think too many places will do fourth doses. I know in Korea you have antiviral drugs available, and that's fantastic. If those can be given to people at higher risk of developing severe COVID, if they can be given those antivirals early in their illness, meaning they have to get tested soon, they have to be able to see a doctor early in their illness, that can make a big difference as well. And I think it's great that you have that option in Korea.
And finally, as a parent of two young kids myself, this is a question that's quite close to my heart. But what we're seeing is certain countries are really pushing very hard to give emergency use authorization for COVID-19 vaccinations for children under 12, sometimes younger than 5 years old. We have all the data in front of us. We know for a fact that there is a minuscule amount of very young children that get seriously ill due to COVID. We hear this argument that it's about protecting older members of society, but let's be honest, if you're a parent, you care more about your child than a random older stranger. Why do you think there's this push to vaccinate small kids against a virus which to them is almost never more serious than, say, a nasty cold?
Well, you're right that in most children, if they were to get Omicron particularly, or in the past other strains of COVID, it tends to be a very mild infection. they'll be very, very unlucky if they get anything that's more serious than that. But there is a subset of children who can get more serious disease, maybe children with serious medical conditions that they're being treated for. If they were to get COVID, it could be more serious. And you mentioned there's a small number of severe cases. Those are disproportionately occurring in those most vulnerable children. So for the approval process, it's usually a two-step approval process. The first step is to get the approval from the government to use the vaccine in a particular age group. And then the second step is for an advisory body, maybe the CDC in Korea, to say who should get it. And they may well say it could be approved for all children 5 to 11, but in practice, we're only going to give it to the high-risk children. And that's what's being done, for example, in the United Kingdom. I think it makes sense to do it that way.
Professor Cowling, as always, thank you so much for sharing your insights. We'll hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Turning now to our ongoing coverage of the Winter Olympics taking place in the Chinese capital of Beijing. Short track speed skater Hwang Dae-heon has won South Korea's first gold medal at this year's Games. He was victorious in Wednesday night's 1,500 meters event. The South Korean women's team is also aiming for gold after they qualified for the final after finishing second in their semi-final. Kim Yeon-sung with the details.
Short track speed skater Hwang Dae-heon is bringing home South Korea's first gold at the Beijing Winter Games. Hwang clinched his first gold on Wednesday after finishing first in the 1,500-meter short track event in a time of 2 minutes, 9.219 seconds. It's Hwang's second Olympic medal, following on from the silver he picked up 4 years ago at the Pyeongchang Winter Games for the 500-meter program. Now, with 1 gold and 1 bronze to its medal count, South Korea is in joint 15th place, along with Australia in the medal rankings at this Olympics. The women's short track team will also be gunning for gold this Sunday in the 3,000-meter relay. Wednesday's semifinals was a nail-biting race. The South Korean team, represented by Choi Min-jung, Lee Yu-bin, Kim Ha-rang, and Seo Hui-min, were skating in second place until they were outpaced by the Russian Olympic Committee towards the end. South Korea's chance of making it to the finals looked slim. But then, right at the last minute, Choi Min-jung pushed her way from third to second, doing just enough to secure the team's place in the finals. Choi Min-jung is a 2-time Olympic gold medalist and a 3-time world champion, and will also be skating in the quarterfinals for the 1,000-meter program along with Lee Yu-bin this Friday. Both short track speed skaters passed the preliminary stages on Wednesday. South Korea currently leads the medal tally for short track speed skating with a total of 49 medals since 1992. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
And Korean-American snowboarder Chloe Kim was the top qualifier in the first run of the women's snowboarding halfpipe on Wednesday. The 21-year-old finished with a score of 87.75. Although Kim fell on her second ride, her first score was enough to secure first place among 22 snowboarders. She's into Thursday's finals, where the 12 best athletes will compete. Kim won halfpipe gold at the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics.
Russian star figure skater and gold medal winner Kamila Valieva has tested positive for the banned drug trimetazidine. This is according to Russian media on Wednesday. The Russian Olympic Committee earlier declined to comment on reports, while the IOC has said it's doing its best to resolve the problem. Tuesday's gold medal ceremony for the 15-year-old and her teammates had been postponed for unexplained legal reasons. A decision on possible penalties has yet to be made. South Korean figure skater Cha Jun-hwan is aiming for a top 5 finish in Thursday's men's single free skating program in the coming hours. Cha will perform 2 quadruple jumps, the quadruple shao chow and quadruple toe loop, for the first time, considered among the most difficult moves in the sport. Successfully pulling them off will be key, as the top 3 skaters from Tuesday's short programme will attempt at least 3 quadruple jumps. Cha finished in 4th place with a career-based tally of 99.51 in the men's short programme.
As tensions continue to simmer over Ukraine, Russia is again demanding security guarantees from the West. This includes an end to the eastward expansion of NATO and the removal of all weapons that Western countries have supplied to Ukraine. Kim Hyo-sun has this report.
Russia is once again calling for an end to NATO expansion for the sake of security across Europe. Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova told reporters Wednesday that the only way to de-escalate the Ukraine crisis was for Western states to remove the weapons they've given Kiev, withdraw military instructors from Ukraine, and halt NATO-Ukraine drills. She also stressed Moscow has no aggressive plans in mind. She added Ukraine needs to remain a neutral state as it was declared in 1990 when it adopted its declaration of state sovereignty. Meanwhile, the EU says it's ready to resume formal talks with Russia. In a letter to Moscow, Brussels again urged the Kremlin to pull its military back from the border. The letter, signed by the EU's top diplomat, represents the bloc's collective response to a recent memo Russia sent to EU countries. It specifically underscores the talks through the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as all EU countries are members of that organization, as opposed to NATO, which only includes 21 EU states. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Iran has unveiled a new domestically made missile with a range of almost 1,500 kilometers. This development taking place just a day after Tehran and Washington resumed indirect talks to try and salvage their stalled 2015 nuclear deal. Iranian state TV on Wednesday unveiled the new missile named Khaybar Shakhan, which refers to an ancient Jewish oasis that was overrun by Muslim warriors in the 7th century. It added the missile is highly accurate and can evade missile shield systems. Iran has one of the biggest missile programs in the Middle East. The country says its ballistic missiles have a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, capable of reaching Israel and U.S. bases in the region.
Russia has criticized Japan's push to list the Sado mine associated with wartime forced labor as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. On Wednesday, Moscow's foreign ministry said Russia understands the stance taken by South Korea, which has been strongly protesting the move. Russia criticized how Tokyo is seeking to whitewash crimes against humanity overseen by Japan's wartime leaders. Earlier this month, Japan submitted a letter of recommendation to UNESCO to register the former gold and silver mine where over 1,000 Koreans were forced to labor as a heritage site.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, semiconductors are the vital core of any electronic device, from toothbrushes and smartphones to driverless cars and military planes. South Korean and Taiwanese companies Samsung and TSMC currently dominate chip production, accounting for over 70% of world manufacturing. But amidst geopolitical uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific region and an ongoing supply crunch around the world, governments are looking to secure domestic production in their countries. Now, this means massive budgets to build new plants, R&D to develop cutting-edge technology, and schemes to train and employ many, many new workers. Now, to discuss all these developments, today we are joined by Chris Camacho, President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, and Professor Song Soo-young of Chungang University in Seoul. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today. And well, starting with you, Mr. Camacho, now you're leading this semiconductor business investment in the state of Arizona, really. And what makes Arizona the place to build America's semiconductor hub over other candidate sites such as the state of Texas?
Sure. Well, we've had a long-standing history in the semiconductor microelectronics sector, and specifically dating back to 1949 when Motorola was building the first radio transistor here in the Metro Phoenix market. Since that time, we've seen now 100,000 people employed by companies that work within the semiconductor sector. So the entirety of the supply chain is shifting to this region, and whereas we're seeing companies like Taiwan Semiconductor and Intel together investing over $30 billion of new next generation level investment. And that's really stemming from Arizona State University and the quality of our community college network. So for example, you have 30,000 engineers being produced by our universities here in the region. Couple that with a really strong backbone, resilient grid, energy grid, and really modern infrastructure, because we're a young place, and being the fastest growing location in the United States, people are flocking here to take advantage of jobs opportunities.
Well, currently, Samsung and TSMC, they're the only companies that can produce 5 nanometer chips, and they're headed towards releasing the more sophisticated 3 nanometer ones. Should they be worried about losing their competitive advantage in terms of technology? Particularly Samsung, how can it really stay ahead of the game?
Actually, TSMC is the largest foundry and the supplier of the semiconductor all around the world. They used to have some factory running in Shanghai and mainland China, but because of the conflict between US and China, then they are actually forced to build up some foundry manufacturing company very close to United States or within the United States. So the same is the case for Samsung, because Samsung is also pressured to build up, because they already have some factory in the Austin, Texas, and the nearby town they have established semiconductor fabrication plant in the U.S. And as you mentioned, now as far as I know, there are 3 competitors in the semiconductor industry to reduce the size of the process node as small, as narrow as a 2 or 3 nanometer. Currently, the 5 nanometer is, and in the future they focus on the 2 nanometer. So to that regard, because of as the width of the process node is reduced, they could integrate the semiconductor in this very small place, so which means that the productivity efficiency could be dramatically enhanced.
Professor Song, well, as you said, it does seem that TSMC is really getting itself out there, and it's working more closely with the United States and Japan. It seems building plants, expanding their collaborations with local businesses compared to Samsung. So do you think the South Korean companies should be worried about these kinds of developments? And what I'm particularly curious about is whether you think some geopolitics might be coming into play, with South Korea perhaps being sidelined by Japan for not being a part of its strong free and open Indo-Pacific kind of initiative.
Sure. Actually, I forgot to mention the TSMC is they have extended their production fabrication plant in the Sony with the collaboration with the Sony in Kumamoto. Yeah, very southern west of the Japan. So I believe the geopolitical issue is critical today, but at least we are fully aware of this. So collaboration and cooperation would be kind of win-win game in both sides, U.S. and China and Taiwan and South Korea also. So South Korea is Samsung has they have as I mentioned earlier, they have some diversification is accomplished, but Samsung has, in terms of a financial perspective, Samsung's cash flow fluctuation is not as much as TSMC, because TSMC's usually they produce some foundry and semiconductor always follows some kind of semiconductor cycle. So to that regard, some TSMC has some weakness in the financial status. Samsung has a relatively stable cash flow because they have already achieved some diversification. So now Intel is trying to keep up and follow what the TSMC and the Samsung. So geopolitical issue is still of main concern, and but for the future of the prospect of the market is, I think I hope it will be, it should be good for the countries and for the economies. Otherwise, always we may end up with some loss on both sides.
And of course, this rush to develop semiconductor hubs is expected to widely benefit countries everywhere, and especially around the local communities where these hubs will be based. And as for Arizona, as for Phoenix, Mr. Camacho, what kind of benefits have chip plants brought to the area?
Well, I think it's first important to reference what the professor mentioned about geopolitics and the importance of having domestic supply, domestic production. And what we've seen really in the last 30 years is an erosion of U.S. product manufacturing, whereby in 1990, about a third of the chip production globally was done in the United States. That's now just over 10%. So we've seen that slide occur, much like we've seen in other industries, as we've seen globalization continue to evolve. So with that, one, it starts with the economy. We want to ensure we're fortifying the U.S. economy, doing what we can to keep supply chain or enhance supply chains in the evolution of that ecosystem to occur. So we have closer proximity from natural resources to ingots to wafers to packaging to substrates, all of those ecosystem components in the United States. And coupled with that comes the jobs. So the jobs for our everyday Americans in this sector, and specifically semiconductors, produce on average over 130,000 average wage jobs for our citizens. And the supply chain that's associated with precision manufacturing and other aspects of this industry also yield a pretty strong direct and indirect supply chain value. And what I mean by that is when you produce a semiconductor job here in the United States, you're also producing about 5.5 other jobs to support that one semiconductor firm. So as you're seeing TSMC roll out their first phase here in North Phoenix, there's going to be tens of thousands of additional jobs created. And so what we try to do at Greater Phoenix Economic Council is work with these global enterprises to ensure they can go through the cost and tax and all of the infrastructure due diligence. And at the end of the day, this is about growing a vibrant, healthy economy. And I think it goes without saying, but the United States under President Biden is in a position to further this effort with the CHIPS Act. And we're seeing also now the EU advance the CHIPS Act as well. So we're seeing a very competitive global front to try to induce the domestic manufacturing in this technology space. And one final thing I'll say is if you look at what's occurred with the COVID-induced pandemic and the supply chain disruption, we were left caught with the realization that a lot of our product was being brought in from offshore. And particularly during the holiday season, where you had pretty dramatic demand for chip-enabled products, consumer products, you were seeing emptier shelves than you've ever seen before. So it's hitting your everyday consumer. But certainly the headline is about TSMC and Samsung and Intel and many of the other firms and companies like EMD and onsemi and many others here in Metro Phoenix continue to make major strategic investments.
And Professor Song, with multiple countries from the US and South Korea to those in the European Union intending to become self-reliant in chip technology, do you see possible cross-border tensions and also possible trade conflicts arising over this in the coming years?
Yeah, clearly geopolitical issues in Europe and in Asia both are very critical stage right now. I hope it will be, it should be resolved peacefully and without any further development of escalation of tensions between the United States and China and the United States and Russia and Europe. So hopefully as the council chairman has mentioned, that in the U.S. For the past several decades, the world economy has been characterized by the globalization, so which means offshoring, building factories and fabrication plant outside the countries and looking for some cheap labor and lower cost. However, since 2019 and since the inauguration of the U.S. President Donald Trump, then the trend has been totally reversed. And then for the upcoming years, I expect the nearshoring or the onshoring of the plants in order to keep some stable supply chain to assure the supply of the important parts, and then the abrupt breakout of such a pandemic could disrupt the supply chain very vastly and could have a very negative impact on the economy.
Mr. Camacho, now, in addition to economic benefits, there are also some concerns as well, particularly those related to the environment. Now, chip factories, they're known to swallow up around 20 million gallons of water and, of course, a huge amount of energy, which produces waste and some toxic chemicals, which can, of course, harm the environment. How are you going to deal with these kind of issues in your area?
Well, first of all, it starts with leadership and the legacy of our leadership that we've had under Governor Doug Ducey and a number of our mayors here. We've had decades of working with the semiconductor sector. And so Intel adding its most recent 52 and 62 fabs and many others across the region, we know how to work with the water, the wastewater needs, the air emissions, the waste, that's been kind of rooted in our history. And so as a byproduct, however, while they have a pretty significant impact on our natural resources and our grid, we have focused on a number of resiliency plans, and a couple of examples that I think are two mainstay companies that are the most well-known with Intel and TSMC specifically, the recycling and the closed water systems that each of them deploy, where they're actually constant recycling the 90+% of their water. And so while water is certainly a supreme asset here in the Western US, it's something that we work with each of those respective entities, in addition to the other companies in the supply chain, to ensure that we're being good stewards of this environment. And so both of those particular companies have had global accolades in building LEED certified facilities to, in many respects, being nationally acclaimed for their water and wastewater reuse plans. And in one case, the city of Chandler, which is in the Southeast Valley here in Metro Phoenix, has worked closely with Intel after every single project expansion to ensure that we have a codified water plan as well as a wastewater stream plan in all of the waste. So we work closely as a team here in Arizona to ensure that these kind of companies, not just having a good experience through the due diligence process, but that's the reason why Intel has a number of fabs here. And I know TSMC and many other companies will continue to expand here.
Professor Song, before we go, now South Korea is going to spend about $451 billion on domestic semiconductor production over the next decade. What do you make of this plan, and do you think it can really succeed over these competing initiatives that we're seeing around the world?
Yeah, the South Korean government has a plan to make some progress and help the Samsung and other SK Hynix and those other companies to pursue so much deeper and more sophisticated R&D in the semiconductor industry. And because as long as the trend of automation and digitalization cannot be reversed, without some serious war or some kind of conflict that ends up with war. Without such a threat, I think the market is expected to expand. So the demand for the semiconductor and is on the increasing trend. Therefore, that's why we have what is important is to increase the production efficiency of the fabrication plant of the semiconductor for Samsung. So I don't know, but maybe some even smaller than nanometer is angstrom. The unit of measure of width is angstrom. If that succeeds, and then we could have the production efficiency has been dramatically increased, and then we could have the application and usage of the semiconductor is going to be expanded further. So the prospect is still promising, I believe.
I see. Well, that was Chris Camacho, President and CEO of Greater Phoenix Economic Council, and Professor Song Soo-young of Chungang University in Seoul. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has unveiled its latest flagship line of Galaxy smartphones. The company is introducing 3 premium models targeting consumers of all tastes and budgets around the world. Kim Sang-min reports.
Samsung Electronics has unpacked its latest set of Galaxies, delivering on its promise to deliver best-in-class technology.
It's the ultimate smartphone to rewrite the rules of innovation, to make your everyday epic. And it will empower more people from more places to join in building a more inclusive future.
There are 3 phones under its new Galaxy flagship line, the S22, the S22 Plus, and the S22 Ultra. Among them, the Galaxy S22 Ultra is the most advanced of the 3 with a larger and more vibrant display, a triple-lens camera, and the most advanced processors. But what thrilled many tech fans was the built-in S Pen, a feature never before seen in S models. With this, the S model effectively takes over from the Galaxy Note. The Galaxy S22 and Galaxy S22 Plus are catered to consumers who seek a premium product, but one that's lighter on the wallet. One of the key features is the enhanced camera. With bigger image sensors and new features like nightography, using AI technology, the camera can let in more light, draw out details, and capture colors more vividly, even when it's dark. While Samsung spared no expense on the new tech, it decided to keep the price the same as the previous series, likely in a bid to solidify its leading position in the global market.
The chip supply shortage has been intense, so the industry expected the retail price of new Galaxy series as well as the iPhone to be higher this time. But considering sales of the last Galaxy S series released in 2021 did not meet expectations, I believe Samsung froze the price to attract more customers this year.
The Galaxy S22 Ultra retails for around $1,200. The other 2 models at around $830 to just under $1,000. During the event, Samsung also introduced its vision for sustainability, promising to incorporate repurposed ocean-bound plastics throughout Samsung's entire product lineup, starting with new Galaxy series. Pre-orders for the devices start next Monday in South Korea. The S22s will be available in stores across Korea, the US, and Europe from February 25th. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
The Korean zombie thriller All of Us Are Dead is currently ranked as the 5th most popular non-English language series on Netflix. The series made it to the top 10 on Tuesday, which was based on how many hours the series has been viewed in the first 28 days following its release. All of Us Are Dead had over 361 million hours, just 10 days since it made its debut. The spotlight has also turned to the original webtoon behind the series called Now at Our School. The number of views jumped by 80-fold since the show's release on Netflix on January 28th.
And now it's time to get a look at what's going on around the world. And for this, we have Lee Seung-jae joining us from our Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning, Seung-jae. So let's start in Turkey. People there have been protesting surging energy bills, and they're making sure that their message gets across clearly.
That's right. So not just shopkeepers and ordinary citizens, but also members of Turkey's main opposition party got together and set their energy bills on fire on Wednesday to protest against these surging prices. For many business owners, they want to see some changes made quickly before next month's bill is issued.
We want the local administrators and bureaucrats to hear us. We want them to respond to our pleas and find a solution to this before we receive the next bill.
Now, the latest protest comes as inflation leaped to nearly 50% in January, raising the cost of living for Turks who are already struggling to make ends meet after a massive currency crash in December. Now, while the government raised the minimum wage by 50% this year, it's also hiked prices for gas, power, petrol, and road tolls to account for import price volatility. Now, in response, a presidential spokesperson said a new measure regarding energy bills would be announced very soon. Now, speaking of protests, thousands of protesters also took to the streets of Buenos Aires on Tuesday, demanding the government scrap its debt deal with the IMF. Now, demonstrators rallied outside the country's iconic government building, the Casa Rosada, to voice their opposition against President Alberto Fernandez's deal with the IMF in January for a $44.5 billion standby agreement. Now, the deal would see debt payments pushed back, but involve pledges to meet certain economic targets agreed with the lenders, which protesters say will cause further economic turmoil in the country. Now, the death toll in Madagascar due to Cyclone Batsirai has now risen to 92 as more reports of damage flow in from heavily affected areas. The authorities fear the death toll could rise even further, as they say most of the victims had drowned or been crushed when their houses collapsed. The deadly cyclone slammed the Indian Ocean island last Saturday and comes just 2 weeks after Cyclone Anna killed 55 people and displaced 130,000 in a different region of the country. And finally, Pope Francis on Wednesday condemned assisted suicide as an unacceptable deviation from medical ethics as the Italian parliament resumed talks on a law to regulate it. Now, speaking at his general audience, the pontiff spoke in favor of care programs to help terminally ill patients live as comfortably and humanely as possible. Back in 2019, Italy's constitutional court partially decriminalized assisted suicide under certain conditions, but said it's up to the parliament to fully pass it. Now, a poll by one research group back in 2019 also showed that 92% of Italians were in fact in favor of allowing assisted suicide.
Good morning. Morning temperatures are a couple of degrees higher than the same time yesterday, and ratings will keep rising through the weekend. But again, ultrafine dust will choke parts of Korea. Chungcheongdo and Jeollabuk-do provinces will have high levels of ultrafine dust all day today. Elsewhere, could see dust levels rising in the morning and at night. Meanwhile, it's been snowing and raining on Jeju Island. Mountainous regions on Jeju were under a heavy snow advisory, which has been lifted, but do expect more precipitation through the first half of the day. Daily lows in most areas are 3 to 7 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Daegu, Gwangju, Gyeongju at the freezing mark. Busan kicking off the day at 4 degrees Celsius. Afternoon highs in Seoul will be at 7 degrees, Daegu topping out at 11 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Skies will get sunnier as the day goes on, while dry alerts remain in place in eastern parts of the country and here in the capital. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Bream. Thank you as always for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.